Good afternoon, everybody. Thanks for joining us on today's webinar. This is Paul with CommonLook, and today we are going to talk about generating accessible PDF documents automatically from databases and from data sources. In case you were wondering, if you were trying to talk to us while doing the sound check or anything and we couldn't respond to you, it's not you, it's me. We have muted everybody when you came in just to help reduce the background noise and so on. But we will happily answer your questions and respond to your comments and so on. Please feel free to reach out to us with an email after the webinar or during the webinar. Drop a note in the Q&A pod or in the chat. And from time to time, I'll bounce back and forth and check those things and see if there's any questions, comments, and certainly at the end, try to get your questions and comments responded to with the time that we have remaining. So with that being said, today we're going to talk about generating accessible PDF from databases. And I thought that a good approach would be to show you kind of where we're headed and then how we get there. So I've got some sample PDFs, right? So we'll just go ahead and open some of these up. So generating the PDFs, right? We're going to eventually start from scratch, but here's where we're headed, and here's how the whole process works. So, for example, when clients come to us and say, we've got to put these documents together, the information is in some kind of database, for example. They're currently generating their PDFs, and then, of course, the PDFs have to be remediated and have to be made accessible, and that's very time-intensive and labor-intensive and not cost-effective. So, for example, what we'll do is we'll talk to these clients and we'll get samples, for example, of their pharmacy directory. And we'll look at the document and see, visually how is it supposed to look, how are things supposed to be laid out on the page, and so on. But also, we'll look at what kind of accessibility concerns are there in the documents. One glaring accessibility concern with this particular PDF could be that there's actually not any tags, right? So, of course, when we generate the accessible PDF, it'll have tags, the reading order will be established, heading levels, alternative text, for example, for the symbols, and all of the accessibility concerns will be addressed. What it starts with, or how this process starts, is we look at the samples of their documents and then we build a layout file, right? So the layout file has all of the, as the name kind of implies, all of the information with how the document is going to look visually, but again, also has all of the accessibility things baked into it. Now, you may have been on other webinars that we've put on in the past or heard other presentations. It's important to note that even though today's process that we're going to talk about is an automated process, accessibility cannot be achieved 100% through automation. Even though today's process is automated, it starts out with a manual labor process. And the manual labor part in this scenario is putting together the layout file so that visually everything is right, contrast is good, and all of the visual components that go into a document. Color's not the only way that information is being conveyed. Legibility and so on, just all of the factors, right? But also looking at the accessibility concerns so that we can address that as well from a proactive standpoint in putting together the layout file. And then when the time comes to bring the data to the layout file, then then at that point all of the work has been done, the data flows in, and we're going to generate PDFs. So here's just some samples of documents that we're going to generate today. The end goal, that documents look like these here. So for example, this directory, this pharmacy directory, or for example, this explanation of benefits, and we'll notice that there's data tables and so on in the explanation of benefits. And then there's also a prior authorization document which lists drugs and information about various medications and so on. So again, this is where we're headed. So our team would look at these documents, put together the layout files, work with the clients for where the data is coming from that's going to eventually flow into these documents, and then put it all together and generate PDFs. So to do that, we'll assume then that the layout files have been created. So to use CommonLook Dynamic, which is our tool to generate accessible PDFs from data sources, from databases and so on, there's a number of ways that we can deploy CommonLook Dynamic. What I'm going to show you today, the version that I'll show you today, is hosted on our server. Can also be hosted internally on your server. Or there's also a web service API that can plug into clients' process that they currently have in flow for creating their PDFs. So I'm going to go ahead and log in, and we'll go ahead and get started with creating our PDFs. So when I log into CommonLook Dynamic, I'm brought to the dashboard screen, which just shows me some prior batch running information. And the batches, of course, is how we generate the PDFs. We can generate one PDF in a batch, or we can generate multiple PDFs in the same batch. All right, so here's the last completed batches and whether or not I have any running and so on, and some historical data for how many batches have I run in June, July, and in August. Right. So now what I want to do though is I want to create my PDFs. Right. So I'm going to navigate to the batches screen by choosing that button in the toolbar. And when I navigate to the batches screen, there's going to be information about batches that have been run in the past, so I can go check those out, see where they are. I could rerun them. I could go download the PDFs from those batches and so on. Right? For today's example, we're going to generate a new batch. We're going to generate new PDFs. To do that, I'll navigate to the Create New Batch button, select that, and now CommonLook is going to automatically name the batch, which is fine. I'm just going to go with that, but I could rename it if I wanted to. And then we need to add PDFs to our batch, right? So generated PDF files, choose add a PDF, right? And so for example, we'll start with, we'll make a directory. So I'll say, because this is the GSA webinar series, that we'll call this GSA directory. Now below the file name, it looks like there's checkboxes for compliant with accessibility standards, and then it looks like there's a series of checkboxes. One might think that they could uncheck those boxes, but in fact you can't. This is more to show you that the PDFs that we generate will be compliant with these standards. Of course, we don't want people to be able to choose, I'm going to make a PDF and have it not be accessible, right? That's kind of not the point. The point is to generate accessible PDF. So this just shows you that our files are going to be compliant with ISO 32000, which is literally the standard on how to make a PDF. Section 508, this is the original Section 508, and of course WCAG 2.0 is the refreshed Section 508. PDF UA is also here, and the HHS standard for US Department of Health and Human Services. So we're going to comply with all of these standards. And then the next step is, if I'm going to make a directory, I need to choose the correct layout. So from my available layouts that I have, I'm going to select my directory layout. Now, what's built into the layout file, not only, like I mentioned, is all of the visual components of the PDF, also all of the accessibility concerns and things that need to be taken care of, but also in the layout file, we've determined where the data is coming from. So for the sake of today's examples, the data sources, the databases, if you will, actually from an Excel file, right? So many databases will export to Excel, for example, and then you could use those Excels to generate the PDFs, or you could just have the layout file call right to the database. Any clean, machine-readable data is usable data for CommonLook Dynamic. Right? So this is the data for today is coming from an Excel spreadsheet or workbook. So I need to go and choose that file. Of course, if you're working from the web service API, then all of this will be set up so that somebody doesn't have to manually go make these choices. They're already made, and you just set it to run, and away you go. So from my folder here, I'm going to choose the sample directory Excel spreadsheet, and go ahead and select that and just choose open, and it brings it into my add file, my add PDF file screen in Dynamic, and that's all I need to do for this one. So I'm going to go ahead and hit save. Now let's say, for example, that I also want to make some of those other PDFs that we had looked at before, and I want to make my explanation of benefits. So we'll just call this, for the sake of you not having to watch me type poorly, GSA EOB for explanation of benefits. Right? So then again, I need to choose my layout. So I'm going to choose my explanation of benefits layout. Again, for this example, it's going to be Excel. So I'll go and get that Excel, which is in this folder, and save. And then, of course, we'll do our prior authorization as well. So again, GSA and then PA for prior authorization, and I'll go choose that layout. Right? Again, Excel. So I'll go get that Excel workbook as well, and choose save. So we've got, back to the create and run batch screen, we've got a number of PDFs that are going to be added to our batch. I can edit this list. I can delete them. If I say, no, I don't want to make a directory, I could choose delete and take it out. That would be fine. Then from within my organization, I can choose users to share my PDFs with, or share my batch with, so that I can run it, and then other people can go download them as needed, for example. And then there's various scheduling options. So for today's webinar, we're just going to choose run immediately, but you can also set this up to run one time, but not right now. For example, if you want to run one batch one time, but you know that the data is not going to be in the database until the upload happens at midnight. So you can schedule it to run one time at 12:01 a.m. and then you'll be able to make your PDFs. Or if this is the type of thing, for example, a lot of healthcare, a lot of health insurance companies, for example, need to generate monthly directories of their pharmacies and their physicians and so on. So you can choose to run this monthly, and then we've got additional scheduling options as well. Right? You can choose a different time zone for the server if it's somewhere other than where you are. Give it a start date and a start time. You could also give it an end date and an end time if you needed to. If you need to run it monthly, you choose your months. If you just want to run it quarterly, for example, you can just set it to run quarterly or whatever you need. I'm just randomly picking some months for this example. And then you can further specify, for example, if I want to run my batch on the 3rd of my selected months, then I can choose to run it that way. Or if I say on, and then I can choose to select, for example, I can run on the 3rd Tuesday of those selected months, right? Because if I choose just the 3rd of the month, well, some months the 3rd might be on a Saturday or a Sunday when the server isn't running, and I may not get my PDFs, for example. So if I, for example, in my organization, if I need to make sure that the server is going to be on, I would want to be sure to choose a weekday, right, for example. Now, for this webinar today, again, we're going to choose run immediately. So I'll go back to that option and then choose run batch. So the batch has been scheduled. I'm back to the batches screen. Originally, it said scheduled in the status column. Then it said running. Now it says finished, right? If we have a big batch, it might take a little bit longer. And if you're wondering where it is, you can go to the progress screen and you can check the progress of your batch while it's running. Now, we've got 3 PDFs listed in the batch from this screen. I could download them individually from here, or if I go back to the batch screen, if I choose manage runs, then this will take me to this particular batches screen with the information of when I ran it and so on. If I choose download from here, because there's multiple PDFs in my batch, CommonLook is going to put it in a zip folder for me. So I'll go ahead and say, okay, I want you to put it in a zip folder for me. Then when I choose download again, it downloads the zip folder, right? So my default is that it's going to go to my desktop. So I'll just navigate to my desktop, and get our PDFs that we just made. So here's the zipped folder with the PDFs that we just generated. So GSA directory, GSA EOB, GSA PA for the prior authorization. So now to open up, for example, my directory, right, looks just like the original directory looked, right, from the physical view. Everything is there. But now when I navigate to the tag tree, I'm going to see that it is in fact tagged. I have an H1 for, in this example, that's the title of my my document, is the Express Scripts Pharmacy Network. So there's my H1, and then H2 for the names of the cities or the counties, and then H3 for the pharmacies, and then paragraphs for the content related to each pharmacy. Now, also important to note, so Beers Pharmacy, for example, has the little symbol next to it, right? This is getting to the accessibility concerns that we address. If I scroll down to the bottom of this first page, we'll see that that symbol means that they are able to fill up to a 90-day supply of medication. So if I open up that H3 for Beers Pharmacy, I'll notice that there's a span tag with that symbol in it. And if I check the alternative text, I see that as a screen reader user, for example, when my screen reader lands on that span tag, it's going to tell me not the character that was used to make that symbol, but instead that Beers Pharmacy can fill a 90-day supply of medication, right? So all of the accessibility concerns as well as the visual are taken care of, for our documents. I'll go look at the explanation of benefits. Right, so here's that one, and again, looks just like the physical view that we used to build our template. Checking out the tags now, again, it's tagged, so that's great. Other things have been addressed. For example, this one has a logo at the top for the insurance company, and if I check their alternative text, Acme Insurance Company logo. So there we go, that's all taken care of, put in there for us. We have our content in the document till we get down to explanation of benefits. And for example, when we navigate down to the data tables, we see that our tables are put together correctly with our rows and our header cells and so on. Everything is all taken care of. The text for all of the cells going across that top row, or sorry, the second row there of headers, and then the third row with the data going across the table as well. So all of our tables have been taken care of. And for the third example, for the prior authorization, now this one wasn't necessarily the most exciting looking of documents. We've got drug names and we've got tags, by the way. We'll go ahead and open up the tag tree. So here's the H1 PA prior authorization criteria and so on. So an H2 and then the information there, and then H3. So the prior authorization group in an H2, and then information about that group, the drug name, covered uses, and so on are the H3s, followed by the paragraphs of text. And then when we navigate down to the next H2, it's going to be for the next group, and continuing on with H3s and so on. What's interesting about this is it literally took seconds to generate these PDFs in the batch. The directory is 15 pages long, but there's a lot in it, right? The explanation of benefits only 2 pages long, but there's kind of a lot in that with the tables, and the prior authorization is 101 pages, right? So just the sheer size and the workload that would go into creating these documents, or that would go into the time spent in manually remediating these, right? Instead, spending the time setting up the layout, making sure that the layout file is put together correctly, addressing all of the concerns. Then when you set this to run, everything goes much more smoothly, much more quickly, and of course then you're saving yourselves time and possible expense from having to remediate PDFs after the fact. So that's pretty much CommonLook Dynamic in a nutshell. The big takeaways: works from a data source, whether that's a SQL Server or an Excel spreadsheet or wherever it may be. We'll work with you to figure out where your data is coming from. We'll work with you to figure out where that information needs to go in the document and put it together for you so that you can pretty much set it and forget it, let it run, and you know that your PDFs are good to go. There's a lot of health insurance companies that utilize this for their massive directories and so on. There's government agencies and financial sector for things like statements that need to be generated and so on. One of now many clients, of course, we can't name names, but we did do a big program with the U.S. Department of Veterans Affairs, and they are currently using CommonLook Dynamic to generate some of the PDFs some of their massive PDFs actually with very, very long and involved data tables. We worked with them to put things together so that they could generate these long, complex data table PDFs with CommonLook Dynamic so that they don't have to literally spend hours remediating them. I do see that there's at least one comment in Q&A. So how do we learn to make layouts? That is an awesome question. Actually, the layouts is something that CommonLook takes care of for you, right? We'll work together with you, but we put together the layouts because one thing that's very important to keep in mind with CommonLook is that we guarantee our work. So we're going to guarantee that these documents are accessible and they're standards compliant, so that when you use Dynamic to make them and you put them on your website or you send them to people or you otherwise deliver them, you're guaranteed, and we're standing behind that you are delivering accessible PDF. So we work with you, but our development team puts together the layout files so that we're sure that everything has been addressed and been addressed correctly. Keep in mind that CommonLook's been exclusively in the PDF accessibility realm for the last 20 years. So we're bringing our 20 years of development and 20 years of PDF accessibility experience, knowledge, and expertise to the table when we build your layouts. But thank you for asking. That was a great question. Any other questions or comments? This one's pretty short today because Dynamic really, once it's set up, it's really easy to use. Happy to answer any questions or comments. Not seeing anything in the chat. Or congratulations, you scored the lucky webinar where it ends early and you get some of your day back. I'll hang on for a little bit and see if any questions pop in. Here we go. Awesome. So what if I'm generating a PDF that combines a pre-generated file and added content? Okay, that's a great question as well. So if you're generating a PDF that combines a pre-generated file, I guess, am I assuming that you're kind of maybe merging two PDFs, for example? Maybe a little bit more clarification on that question. Are you trying to merge like a pre-generated PDF with a new one that you're trying to make? Or what's the process? We might need to follow this up a little bit more afterwards. So, okay, so a database generates PDF files, right? So what we would do is this would be a great example for where the API would be useful. So if you've got a system now where you have a database that's generating PDF tables, then we would plug the API into that process. So your database does what it needs to do and the data flows into it from wherever it's coming from and so on. And then as part of the PDF generation process, it would flow through Dynamic, the Dynamic API to generate your PDFs there. Hopefully that made sense. If not, please feel free to ask a follow-up question. And let's see, how would logos, images, and watermarks work, right? So for example, if I go back to the explanation of benefits document, there's a logo at the top, the Acme Insurance Company logo. So we take a look at the document, we see, what kinds of things do we need to address, and going back to the top in the tag tree, here's the figure tag. So we see, oh, okay, there's the logo. It's going to need to go into a figure tag, and of course that figure tag is going to have alternative text, and so we would make sure that the alternative text is assigned to the figure tag correctly, right? So logos, there were a couple of other examples. Images, right? Same thing. Watermarks, we would have to work with you for, would you want the watermark, for example, tagged at some point in the document so that somebody who's using a screen reader knows that, if the watermark, for example, says draft, somebody using a screen reader would need to know that this is a draft document. So this is exactly where we work with the clients to determine, how, where would you want somebody notified, or when in the reading order would you want somebody notified that this is a draft document, for example. But then, like I said, we put together how the document is going to look. So we would make sure that the watermark was included if you needed it, and so on. Of course, now some standards do address issues with watermarks, right? So not going to go totally in depth on that, but watermark can be problematic and can be an accessibility concern for people visually, something to keep in mind. If you've got a watermark, for example, going across the page, and some of the content, some of the real content on the page kind of gets lost, contrast maybe is an issue, and so on, then that's other things to address, right? Which again, our team would work with you on how the document's going to look and making sure that that contrast is okay. And are you sure you need a watermark, or could we use other options, for example, or whatever? Hopefully that helped to answer your question, though. These are great questions coming in today. Got about 4 minutes left. I'm not seeing any more questions, which is fine. They can pop in. If you are leaving now, that's fine. Thanks for joining in. And if you think of a question later, please feel free to reach out to us again. In fact, we'll go back to the PowerPoint real quickly just to say thanks for coming. And of course, check out upcoming events that we might have on our website. Right? So there's the URL, commonlook.com/events, right? You can check out and see what we have going on our calendar, from training classes to webinars, conference presentations, and so on, right? So go ahead and check that out, commonlook.com/events. And otherwise, there's some contact information for you. CommonLook.com, again, our website, or reach out to us at sales@commonlook.com or training@commonlook.com, or give us a call. In the US, 202-902-0988. For our Canadian friends, 613-270-9582. And our Australian office, if you want to talk to the people with the really cool accents, 614-023-24978. Again, thanks for joining in. Happy to stay on the line and see if any more questions or comments pop up. But by the way, if I didn't mention it before, this webinar is being recorded. When we get it captioned, we will get it sent out to people. Just be checking your email for that. You don't have to email us to ask for the recording. We will send you a notification when it's available. Thanks for joining in, and take care. The question in the chat. Thank you. All right, seems like that's pretty much all of the questions. If you're still here, you get a minute of your day back. Hope you all have a great day. Thanks again for joining in. Take care.